The chamber was packed that morning, every seat filled, cameras positioned at every angle, the air thick with anticipation, the kind that comes before something breaks. Keir Starmer sat on the front bench, arms crossed, jaw set. He knew what was coming. Everyone did. Across the aisle, the conservative leader rose slowly, deliberately. He let the silence build before speaking. Mr. Speaker, the room stilled. I have a very simple question for the Prime Minister. He paused. Let the weight of the moment settle. Where are the 7.8 million people waiting for NHS treatment right now? A collective intake of breath rippled through the chamber. Starmer's expression didn't change, but his shoulders tensed. Because, Mr. Speaker, the Tory leader continued, voice rising with each word before the election, the Prime Minister stood in front of cameras just like these, and promised the British people that Labour would rescue the NHS. He said waiting lists would fall. He said people would finally get the care they deserved. He leaned forward, hands gripping the dispatch box. But the data released by his own government this morning tells a very different story, doesn't it? The numbers were catastrophic. 7.8 million people, the highest NHS waiting list in the entire history of the National Health Service. Hip replacements delayed by years, cancer treatments postponed indefinitely, mental health patients waiting over a year for their first appointment, elderly people deteriorating while they waited, young people watching their conditions worsen, families watching loved ones suffer. And Keir Starmer had promised on camera, in writing, repeatedly to fix it all. Mr. Speaker, Starmer began, his voice measured but defensive. This government inherited an NHS in absolute crisis. Oh, here we go, someone shouted from the conservative benches. Laughter erupted across the opposition side. Starmer's jaw tightened visibly. A crisis, he continued, speaking over the noise, created by 14 years of conservative underfunding, mismanagement, and neglect. We are working day and night to working a backbench. Conservative MP shot to his feet, face flushed red with fury. My constituent, a 72-year-old woman, waited 18 months for a hip replacement. 18 months. She couldn't walk properly. She was in constant pain. And you call that working? The chamber exploded. Shouts echoed from all sides, MPs on their feet, fingers pointing, accusations flying. The speaker banged his gavel repeatedly. Order, order in this house. But the damage was already done. The room was fracturing. Then came the moment that would dominate every news cycle for weeks. The large screen on the chamber wall, normally used only for parliamentary votes, suddenly illuminated. Data, graphs, dot charts, hospital by hospital breakdowns. Someone had leaked the full NHS waiting list analysis, not just national figures, regional data, individual hospital statistics, departmental backlogs. The numbers were worse than anyone publicly knew. Cardiac surgery, average wait time 9 months up from 6 months a year ago. Cancer treatment, delays of 6 months or more in 40% of cases. Mental health services, 14-month average backlog for initial assessments. Orthopedic surgery. Patients waiting over 2 years in some regions. The conservative leader smiled not with joy, but with the cold satisfaction of someone holding all the cards. Mr. Speaker, he said quietly, I didn't bring those numbers to this chamber. The Prime Minister's own Department of Health compiled them. Every camera in the room swung toward Starmer. His face remained expressionless, stone-like, but his hands told a different story. They gripped the bench so hard, his knuckles had gone white. The attack intensified. You stood in front of the British people, the Tory leader continued, his voice building in volume and intensity, and you looked them in the eye and told them Labour would save the NHS. You said waiting lists would drop within 6 months of taking office. He pulled a document from his folder, held it up for the cameras. This is your manifesto. Page 12. Let me quote it exactly. We will cut NHS waiting times by recruiting 10,000 new clinical staff and investing £2 billion in emergency care within our first year. He looked up, locked eyes with Starmer across the chamber. So where's the money, Prime Minister? Where are the 10,000 staff? Where are the results you promised? Starmer stood. The entire chamber held its breath. Mr. Speaker, he began, his voice steady but lacking its usual conviction. We have allocated £1.4 billion to NHS trusts across England. Not 2 billion, the Conservative leader interrupted immediately. And we are in the active process of recruiting not 10,000 staff, thousands of new doctors, nurses, and support workers to tackle this unprecedented backlog. But even as he spoke, his voice seemed to lose energy, and everyone in that chamber could hear it. A woman rose from the Labour benches, MP for a northern constituency, mid-50s, known for her loyalty to leadership, a safe vote, a reliable supporter. Until now, Prime Minister. Her voice cracked slightly. My sister's a senior nurse at Manchester Royal Infirmary. She's worked in the NHS for 23 years. She called me last week in tears. The chamber went quiet. She told me that her ward is so critically understaffed that patients are lying on trolleys in corridors for hours, sometimes overnight. Some of them are elderly. Some are post-operative. They're lying there, in pain, waiting for beds that don't exist. Tears began to well in her eyes. I voted for you, Prime Minister. I campaigned for you. I believed you when you said you would fix this. She paused, swallowed hard, but it's getting worse. Not better. Worse. She sat down. The silence that followed was crushing. Heavy, suffocating, the kind of silence that carries more weight than any speech. Starmer's expression softened for just a moment. A brief flicker of genuine emotion, but he quickly buried it behind his political mask. Mr. Speaker, he said quietly, I understand the frustration. I genuinely share it. But meaningful change takes time. It cannot happen overnight. Time? An SNP MP leaped to his feet, face contorted with rage. People are dying while you talk about time. Scotland's NHS is on its knees because Westminster won't properly fund it. You promised change, real change. But all we're seeing is more of the same failed policies. The chamber erupted again, Liberal Democrats shouting from one side, Greens from another. Even some Labour backbenchers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, refusing to cheer for their own leader. But the Conservatives weren't finished. The Shadow Health Secretary stood, a former doctor. Calm, precise, clinical in her approach. Mr. Speaker, she began, her voice cutting through the chaos. I would like to read something to this chamber. She opened a folder, removed a single sheet of paper. This is an internal memo from the Department of Health and Social Care. It was leaked to the opposition this morning. Starmer's head snapped up, his eyes locked on the document. It states, and I will quote directly, current NHS funding allocations are insufficient to meet manifesto commitments. Staff recruitment targets will not be achieved until 2028 at the earliest. Waiting list reduction goals are no longer considered feasible within the proposed timeframe. She paused. Let those words hang in the air. 2028, Mr. Speaker? Not 6 months, not even 2 years. 4 years from now. She looked directly at Starmer. So, when the Prime Minister stood before the British people and promised them an NHS rescue plan, he already knew or should have known that it was impossible to deliver. Didn't he? The chamber froze. Every eye on Starmer. Every camera zoomed in on his face. He opened his mouth to respond, but for several seconds nothing came out. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10, 15, then finally he spoke. Mr. Speaker, I completely reject the premise of that question. This government is absolutely committed to the National Health Service. We will deliver on our promises to the British people. But his eyes told a different story. The slight hesitation, the defensive posture, the lack of fire in his voice, and the opposition could smell blood in the water. Reject it all you want? The Shadow Health Secretary shot back immediately. But the facts don't lie, do they? The waiting lists are at a record high. Your promises were empty. And the British people, real people with real illnesses, are paying the price for your political dishonesty. She sat down. The Conservative benches erupted in cheers and applause. The Labour benches sat mostly silent. A young MP couldn't have been more than 30 rose from the back benches. Labour member, first term, usually quiet. Mr. Speaker. His voice shook, but not with nervousness. With rage. My father had a heart attack 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. He's been waiting for cardiac surgery ever since. Every single day, we don't know if he'll survive another night. His hands were trembling. The Prime Minister says, change takes time. But how much time does my father have? How much time do any of these 7.8 million people have? The chamber went deathly quiet. Starmer looked directly at the young MP. For a moment, just a brief moment, something genuine flickered across his face. Guilt, regret, sadness, but he quickly buried it again behind the political armor. I am deeply, deeply sorry for your father's situation, he said quietly. We are doing everything in our power. Everything? The young MP slammed his hand down on the bench. The sound echoed through the chamber. You're doing press conferences. You're doing photo opportunities with nurses, but you're not doing anything for people like my father. He sat down abruptly, chest heaving. Several MPs around him placed hands on his shoulders. The speaker rose. Order. I must have order in this chamber, but it was too late. The session had descended into chaos. The Conservative leader stood one final time. His voice was calm now, measured, almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can dodge questions. He can deflect blame. He can point fingers at the previous government for as long as he wants. He paused. But the truth, the simple, undeniable truth is this. He made a promise to the British people. He broke that promise. And now 7.8 million people are suffering because of it. He pointed across the aisle directly at Starmer. That's not politics, Mr. Speaker. That's betrayal. He sat down. The Conservative side erupted in thunderous applause. Labour MPs sat frozen. Some stared at their desks, others at the ceiling. A few whispered to each other. But none of them cheered for their leader. Starmer remained seated throughout. Face carefully blank, hands still gripping the bench, but everyone watching could see it, the cracks forming, the political armor fracturing, the moment when promises collided with reality and reality won. The session ended shortly after. MPs filed out of the chamber in near silence. Journalists rushed to their stations to file stories. Political analysts began crafting their commentary. But one thing was absolutely clear to everyone who had witnessed what just happened. Keir Starmer had been caught making promises he couldn't keep, caught with his own government's data contradicting his words, caught between political necessity and human suffering. And as the cameras finally switched off and the lights in the chamber dimmed, one question hung in the air like smoke. How long could he possibly survive this?